All right, this video is going to cover sentence structure. We have four types of sentences. We have simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences. And the reason this is important is if you learn how to write these four types of sentences and you learn how to punctuate them, this is going to alleviate 90% of the punctuation errors in your essays when you start writing essays. All right, so the first type of sentence we have is a simple sentence, and that consists of one independent clause. For example, John bought the Camaro from his dad. This group of words is an independent clause. It has a subject, a verb, and expresses a complete thought. So you can say, and if you're taking notes, that one simple sentence is the same as one independent clause. Let's just write the whole thing out. Put that in your notes. One simple sentence is the same thing as one independent clause. And we looked yesterday, or at the last video, about how to identify groups of words, what types of clauses they are. Okay, now let's look at the compound sentence. The compound sentence is probably the most complex in punctuation because there's three different ways that you can join the two independent clauses. So a compound sentence consists of two independent clauses. Okay, but you don't ever just put two independent clauses together. For example, you wouldn't say, let me see if I can get my cursor here, and I'll show you what is wrong. You don't say John bought the Camaro, he bought the trailer. Yeah, I know it needs to be capitalized. Okay, this is completely wrong. You don't ever do that. Can you tell what I've done wrong? Well, it's not, the problem isn't that I have two independent clauses, because that is a compound sentence. The problem is right here, the way I've joined those two independent clauses. You have to join them correctly in order for them to be correct. Okay. So see how that corrected that? You have to join the two independent clauses. This is an independent clause. Let me put it in brackets so we can see it. He bought the trailer. That's an independent clause. And John bought the Camaro. That is an independent clause. And we understand independent clauses. However, whenever you go to join those two into one sentences, you have three options, only three options. Otherwise, it'll be incorrect. And it makes a huge difference whenever you're reading and somebody doesn't join them correctly. They put a comma. It's called a comma splice. What I just had was a comma splice. All right, so let's look at the correct ways. The first way is you join with a comma and a coordinating conjunction, not a subordinating conjunction, a coordinating conjunction. So let's review right now the coordinating conjunction. Remember fanboys, and, or, nor, or, but, yet, and sometimes so. These are the coordinating conjunctions. So you would have to use one of those with a comma. That's very easy. It says it right here. Join two independent clauses with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. For example, Matt called his mother. Matt is the subject, called is the verb. So we have one independent clause right there, and this other one, and he told her about his day. This is another independent clause. So the first way that is correct is to use a comma and a coordinating conjunction, or a fanboy, for, and, nor, but, or, and yet. Yeah, I was like, what's the why? Okay, so that is number one. You can use that, or you can use a semicolon between the two independent clauses. Matt called his mother, semicolon, he told her about his day. That's the other option. The third option is you use a semicolon, a conjunctive adverb, and a comma. Now, a conjunctive adverb let's see if I can come up with some. Therefore, however, I think I probably listed furthermore. Did I list some in here? Yeah, right there. Also, consequently, moreover, finally, still. And see, whenever I did it to Google, it looked like it messed it up. I apologize for that your book's messed up. But these are some conjunctive adverbs. So you would use a semicolon and then one of these words and follow that with a comma. So here we have an example. Matt called his mother, then he told her about his day. Matt called his mother, furthermore, he told her about his day. But you have to have all three parts. So let's review this again. You have three ways to join two independent clauses. The way you do not is with just a comma. That is a comma splice. That is a run-on sentence. If I were your teacher and you wrote a comma splice, I would take off 5 points every single time I found that. It's a huge, huge mistake. Okay, let's go. So we have, you can join with a comma and a coordinating conjunction, and, or, nor, for, but, yet, and so. So you use independent clause, comma, coordinating conjunction, independent clause, or semicolon, independent clause, semicolon, independent clause, or the semicolon conjunctive adverb, comma. So independent clause, semicolon, conjunctive adverb, comma, independent clause. Okay, so sentence one is a simple sentence. And you just put a subject, you start it with a capital letter and end it with a period. Sentence two is a compound sentence, and you've got three ways that you can join those. Study these if you don't understand them. Email me if you need more information, if this doesn't make sense to you. Okay, then the third way, the third sentence is a complex sentence. A complex sentence consists of at least one, it has to only have one independent clause and one or more subordinate clause. So it's one of each, a subordinate and an independent. For example, since the car ran out of gas, we had to walk to the store. So the first one is a subordinate clause. The second clause is the independent clause. Here's another example. The girl who wore the red coat danced in the street while the rain gently fell. Now look at this one. This one has two subordinate clause and one independent clause. And you could really have 767 subordinate clauses and one independent clause, and it would still be considered a complex sentence. I mean, technically it would be. So what makes up the sentence structure is how many clauses you have of each type. So a complex sentence is the first one that has the subordinate clause. All right, now, how do you punctuate subordinate clauses? If the subordinate clause comes at the beginning, we call that an introductory subordinate clause. You use a comma. For example, since the car ran out of gas, right here. Let's make that red and let's make that big. Okay, since the car ran out of gas, you use a comma and then you would use the independent clause. We don't really need the bracket. Okay, so if the subordinate clause comes first, you punctuate with a comma. If the subordinate clause comes in the middle or the end, you use a comma if the subordinate clause is non-essential. That means if you can remove the sentence and it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence, it's non-essential. For example, Mrs. Perry, who graduated from college in 1984, wrote a book about the lifespan of turtles. Well, it's irrelevant that she graduated from college in 1984. So this is a non-essential subordinate clause. Mrs. Perry wrote a book about the lifespan of turtles that has, when she graduated from college, has no bearing on that sentence other than it's just a little bit information. Okay, so we set that off with commas. So Mrs. Perry, who has researched the turtle lifespan for 3 decades, wrote a book on the lifespan of turtles. This one, we're not going to set off with commas because the fact that she has researched turtle lifespan for 3 decades gives her the credibility to write a book about the lifespan of turtles. Okay, so you need to know about a non-essential clause, and when to punctuate that. All right, the last type of sentence. Well, let me just summarize here. So there are really four rules that you need to learn whenever you're writing. If you have two independent clauses, you have three choices. You can use a comma and a conjunction, coordinating conjunction. You can use a semicolon, or you can use a semicolon, a conjunctive adverb, and a comma. Those are the three. So if you have two independent clauses joined together, you use one of those choices. Then if your subordinate clause comes before your independent clause, you're going to set it off with a comma. If your subordinate clause comes at the end of the sentence, if it's non-essential, you would use a comma, but otherwise you wouldn't use a comma. So those are about the only rules that you have to learn, but they're super, super important. All right, let's look at compound complex sentences. A compound complex sentence is two independent clauses and one or more subordinate clauses. All right, so here we have an IC stands for independent clause. So I've just written out, you can use independent clause, comma, and then all of these are coordinating conjunctions, but, and, or, nor, for, and yet. Okay, so you use a comma in one of those words. You use a semicolon between two independent clauses, like independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. Use a semicolon conjunctive adverb between two independent clauses. All right, the next one, the location of the subordinate clause determines where the commas go. A complex sentence must have at least one subordinate clause to be considered a compound complex sentence. If the subordinate clause comes at the beginning of the sentence, set it off with a comma. So you have a subordinate clause and then a comma, and then you have two independent clauses. And so you have to join those two independent clauses with a comma and a conjunction, a semicolon, or a semicolon conjunctive adverb and comma. So here we go. If the subordinate clause comes in the middle of the sentence, no punctuation is usually necessary between the independent and the subordinate clause, but there is a comma necessary between the subordinate clause and the independent clause. And then if the independent clause comes at the end, the subordinate clause comes at the end of the sentence, you punctuate the two independent clauses, however is appropriate, with one of those three ways, and then you leave the subordinate clause, unless it is a non-essential clause. All right, I'll come back and we'll work on this in a little while on the next video.